Let's take a look at h. In h, we have a 6x cubed minus 13x squared minus 5x equals 0. And before we do anything, remember that we first want to check to see if they have anything in common. And they do. All three terms. We have an x cubed, an x squared, and an x. All three terms have at least one x. So I'm going to factor out a greatest common factor of x. And then our leftovers will go inside of the parentheses. Let's not lose our equal to 0. So pulling an x out of each and every piece will leave us with, instead of a 6x cubed, a 6x squared. And instead of a 13x squared, it'll leave us with just a 13x. And on the last piece, the only x that you have will disappear because it will get pulled out in front. The question is, though, after you pull out the x, is with the 6x squared minus 13x minus 5, is if you can now do AC method on just that piece. And the answer is yes. We have an A, a B, and a C. So doing our AC method would be a 6 times negative 5, which would be negative 30. And we would need two factors of negative 30 that add up to the middle term, which is a negative 13. Remember, though, to get two things to multiply together to be negative, one needs to be negative and one needs to be positive. But we also want to get negative 13. Well, the only two numbers that will do that is a negative 15 times a positive 2. Negative 15 times positive 2 will give us the negative 30. However, the negative 15 plus the positive 2 also gives us the negative 13. If you were somehow thinking about negative 10 and negative 3, that does give you negative 13. However, negative 10 times negative 3 is not a negative 30. It's a positive 30. That's why that one does not work here. So let's use our negative 15 and 2 to break down our negative 13. So the first thing that we want to do is carry down or bring down our x, our greatest common factor, so we don't lose it. And then now let's work on our AC method. On our AC method, remember the first term, the 6x squared, will stay the same. And what we've come up with is a way to break down the negative 13x into a negative 15 and a positive 2x. It does not matter which order we use. So we'll use the negative 15x and the positive 2x. And then remember, we also have to leave the last term, the minus 5, by itself. Now that we've got four terms, we can do grouping. So now let's do our grouping. Let's group the first two. If you group the first two, they're both divisible by 3 and both have an x, which will leave us with, well, 3 will go into 6 2 times, and pulling out one of the two x's will still leave me with an x. Then 3 goes into 15 5 times, and pulling out the x means the x will be gone, and let's bring down our minus sign. Now let's look at the second two here. If we look at the 2x minus 5, notice that they have nothing in common, so I'm going to bring down my plus, and then if they have nothing in common, the only thing I need to write out in front is just a hidden 1. And we'll leave the 2x minus 5 as is. Now the reason why this works, though, is because now we have a matching 2x minus 5 that is now our greatest common factor that we can now factor out. So we can factor out the greatest common factor of 2x minus 5, and then our leftovers will go instead of their own set of parentheses, the 3x plus 1. And that is how we're going to factor our AC method. So we already had the x out in front, and now I have a 2x minus 5 and a 3x plus 1 that I can carry down. And don't forget, this was an equation. I still need to carry down that this whole thing equals 0. Because I should be getting 3 answers, I need to break off our 3 pieces. The first piece that we're going to break off is just the x. The second piece will be the 2x minus 5. And the third piece will be the 3x plus 1. All 3 factors. Now remember that all three factors are multiplied together and set equal to 0. What that means is, remember, when things are multiplied together to be 0, it means one of those things has to be equal to 0. So I can solve three smaller equations saying that one of the three things needs to be 0. What's nice about this is the first equation's already done. That's one answer is x equals 0. Now let's take a look at the second equation. The second equation, if we add 5 to both sides, gives us that 2x equals 5. Then dividing both sides by 2 gives us that x equals 5/2 is another solution for x. Then we can do the same thing with the third equation. Start by subtracting both sides by 1 to get the x by itself. And that will get us that 3x equals -1. Then we can divide both sides by 3. And what that does is then gets us that x equals -1/3. And again, the idea here is we're getting three answers. X equals 0, 5/2, or it can equal -1/3. All three of these solutions make your equation equal to 0. And again, the reason why we got three solutions is because our highest exponent on our equation was a cubed. Let's take a look at I. In I, we've got 25x cubed equals 64x. Now,